Hello, Darcia Narvaez. How are you doing?
Good. Hello, Lisa Reagan. How are you?
I am doing well. We are on the other side of beta testing the Nesting Ambassador Program, and our first cohort is getting ready to graduate. And so we're going to take a moment and have a little story time and talk about how did we get here. And it's going to help us to have a very interesting appreciation for what our nesting ambassadors are doing out there in the world. So I thought I'd start with saying the very first lecture I ever saw you give was about baselines and how we're missing them as a species. And I have to say, trying to get my head around thinking about us as a species was interesting in that first lecture. But what you were saying is, in the oceans, then, this was probably, 10, 15 years ago, the lecture was, the oceans did not have the correct baselines to measure pollution. So we really didn't know how bad things were. And this week, I thought about that lecture because we have our government now getting rid of all measurements for how are the oceans doing. So we just won't know. And it seems like that's where we are now, is that we are just not going to utilize science to find out the truth of how we're doing, how the planet is doing, and maybe by pretending like the science doesn't exist, I don't know, things will get better, or I don't know where that is supposed to get us. But it's a parallel and a metaphor for where we are as human beings right now. And that was how you used it. So can you say more about that?
Yeah, the story is about shifting baselines that in oceanography and marine biology, people assumed that whatever the oceans were like when they were growing up, that's the way they should be, and that's just normal and healthy. And they discovered, though, that that doesn't work. It's not an appropriate measure or guideline. They did a study in 2006 of replicated a study from the 1950s where they took a boat from California to Hawaii, and every little while they put a bucket over the side of the boat and pulled it up. And in the 1950s, the bucket would come back full of fish. In 2006, when it was reported, the bucket would come back full of plastic. And so there's a shifted baseline. You can't assume that it's normal to have oceans with all this plastic in them and not fish. And so what's happened in science in general, I think, in philosophy and Western scholarship writ large, is that we forgot what's normal for our species in so many ways. What's normal human nature, what's normal to raise human nature, what's normal for getting along, and what human personality is like. So that's what the evolved nested world is all about, getting back to the correct baselines and honoring them.
And what are these baselines, just in case anyone's tuning in who does not know?
So the baselines for human nature are to be cooperative and enhance the well-being of others and be very socially skilled and have all these intelligences that help you move through the world responsibly and respectfully and honoring the natural rhythms of the cosmos, really, and enjoyment and playfulness. And human nature, then, very intelligent, very wise as you grow into your adulthood. And how do you get there? Well, our species, like every animal, has a nest, a developmental system for fostering that nature of that creature, of that organism. Our human nature is fostered by our evolved nest. The practices, starting with infancy, soothing perinatal experience where mother and child feel supported in pregnancy, at birth, no separation, just ongoing connectedness and enjoyment of one another, and breastfeeding, child directed for several years, then multiple nurturers. So baby needs 24/7 pretty much touch and responsiveness because their brain is growing so quickly. And that requires, and we evolved to have multiple nurturers, not just a mom doing this alone or mom and dad, but a community of support, the village, right? And then to have playfulness, to include playfulness in all you do throughout life, so that the evolved nest is for all of us throughout life. Playfulness and multiple mentoring and touch, affectionate touch, and just nature, immersion, connection, partnership, and then regular healing practices because we kind of get off kilter every now and then, mentally, physically, relationally, getting back in tune with the cosmos, with our community, and with ourselves.
So, what I witnessed when I first started doing the work and the conscious parenting movement, as we called it, was what you just listed. The 9 components of the evolved nest were scattered all over the place in different silos of science or activist groups. The breastfeeders were here, the birthers were there. Parents had to pick and choose. And even though, Joseph Chilton Pearce told us parents are in a biocultural conflict in this culture, they have to pick and choose between what biological imperatives you're going to be able to fulfill and what cultural imperatives, like getting up, going to work, and making money to pay rent, you're going to. So we were told, in conflict. But what was it that you found? Because there must have been this point, and I think I want to say the 2010 symposium that you held at Notre Dame seems to me like this point when the evolved nest lens, with all of the incredible people that spoke there, started coming into view. Like Jim Prescott spoke there, and Vincent Folletti, who's the ACEs researcher, spoke. So there was a gathering there of scientists who had a piece of the evolved nest lens, but there was one scientist who was bringing that lens together, and I said I wasn't going to cry. I'll try not to.
Yeah, so how did that come
How did
about?
that?
Yeah, well, it's just been a lifelong quest of mine since my first memory to figure out what's wrong with the world and how do we fix it. And I especially got moved in 2002, 2003, when the United States went to war with Iraq, and I could not understand how people could go do such a thing on no evidence, essentially. And then I was reading widely, trying to figure this out, and found anthropology, the ethnographies, hunter-gatherer childhoods. I found Alan Shore, interpersonal neurobiology. I found Jaak Panksepp, affective neuroscience, and how our mammalian brains work and how we match up with other mammals and what we need. And anyway, it all came together as like, bing, this is what we need to counter, to actually restore our human nature, which is cooperative. It's not aggressive and selfish and violent, all these crazy ideas that have been pervaded by the dominant culture. And so, yeah, I had to bring in people, and I invited Alan Shore and Jaak Panksepp to help me organize the first conference. We had several conferences at Notre Dame, but the first one, they invited all their friends.
Oh, yeah. So let me explain my tears about this for people who haven't seen me cry about the evolved nest before. That same year, in 2010, Kindred World had already been in existence, trying to help parents who wanted to be a part of the conscious parenting movement. And that same year, we had a conference in Washington, D.C., 3-day conference in conjunction. It was in collaboration with some other nonprofits as well. But Joseph Chilton Pearce headlined, Bruce Lipton was there. It was about wellness. The title to the conference was Freedom for Family Wellness. And what we had already discovered about ourselves is that wellness in this culture was not available actively to parents. And, all of the stats about how we're at the bottom of international indexes. Well, some parents were driving themselves crazy with this pursuit of, how do I create this myself then? How do I create the wellness culture I need? And we were doing it without the holistic science lens that you created, and the language to help us get coherence. And the operating inside of a feeling of I'm an oddball was sanctioned and identified by Paul Ray, who has told us in an interview, you can listen to it on Kindred, if you're pursuing wellness in this culture, sustainability, this is a group of people called the cultural creatives. And yes, you're going to be identified as a weirdo, as an oddball. And so we kind of took that identity on, like, okay, I guess we're just odd, we're just weird. But it was with a lot of, you know, I'm trying to use the right language here, desire to want to create a different world for our children. Like this just, you know, okay, this is who we are, but I don't accept this as the kind of world that I want my child to grow up in, and that this is normalized now. But again, the language. So when you started to have these symposiums and bring forward the pieces together, and then you finally did put most of it in this book here, the book that started it all. Can you tell me a little more about what came into focus? I'm especially looking at the subtitle, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom. And we definitely experienced the lack of wisdom in our culture that honored us as a species and, you know, on our evolutionary path towards wellness. In fact, we felt like that was made impossible. How did you bring together this holistic scientific lens? It seems like you had a worldview that was not academic, honestly.
Well, I grew up half my childhood outside the United States, and so I always had a broader perspective than people who only stay in the United States, generally speaking. And I couldn't understand when we go away for a year and come back for 2 years and then go away for a year, why there was so much injustice. And so that was my quest for life. But I also had a lot of interests. So I was a music major in college, and I did classroom music teaching in the Philippines. And then I was a Spanish teacher in the middle school, and I had my own business. And I went to seminary to try to answer the question, what's wrong? Of course, there the answer was, oh, it's original sin. People are just basically bad, and that's what's wrong. Fallen, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, no. And then I ended up finding the field of moral development research, and I thought, aha, they're going to help me answer that question. And so that's how I began my academic career, but got tired of just looking at a very narrow slice of morality. And that's why I was I was already coming in interdisciplinary, right, and thinking outside the box. And then, you know, when you read widely and you listen to all sorts of other disciplines, you understand the world is much more complicated than this little narrow silo that you were trained in. So that's how it began. And again, it's that concern from a young childhood for the well-being of children that just followed me for decades, forever. Still now, right? It's like I cry over the babies of the world. So,
Yeah, yes. But the worldview piece that was shaped by international travel and exposure to different cultures, that was a critical component. I know worldview is formed with travel, can be.
yes. And I forgot to say the book. I was invited by Alan Shore to write for the series Interpersonal Neurobiology, the book series. And so I presented a proposal that was on the neurobiology of moral development. And they made that long title. I didn't want it so long, but anyway. And then while I'm writing the book had a mind of its own. So, well, what's the solution? Well, you got to look at evolution properly, which is evolutionary systems, not just genes. Genes are just one little thing that we inherit. We inherit a whole bunch of other things, including a developmental system for raising the young. And then, well, where do we find the solution? Well, culture, indigenous wisdom, indigenous culture that, you know, has been in existence for millions of years. And then wisdom is what comes out of that. The evolved nest, understanding that the worldview comes out of the evolved nest, and the evolved nest leads to wisdom. So anyway, it's all in there, the beginnings of all this, yeah.
Yeah. Wisdom, that we are designed for wisdom when we are nested.
That's right.
Wow, that is the antithesis to the message that we're given in our patriarchal culture.
Yeah.
So, in your bringing this message forward, though, this is a holistic lens and a holistic science that you're bringing forward. You did encounter some issues, like the chapter on breastfeeding wasn't allowed. Can you talk about that?
Well, in general, the evolved nest is not a welcome piece of information to people who have devoted their lives to one little silo, for example, and that's what they study. We find that it's really hard for some people to welcome the information. And yeah, a lot of doors close and are not opening to publishing this information.
Yeah. But I have read that science is headed into the direction of integration. So you're just on the edge there. You're just working with the emergent,
Yeah, there's not a
as I
lot of
like to say.
incentives for it. Yeah, it's hard still. Yeah,
It's
but
still
we
hard.
have a couple of young scholars who are very interested, so we're very hopeful now.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So there is a name for what is happening here and is now being actively pursued in the Nesting Ambassador program, and it's called the theory praxis gap. And it is a known phenomenon in science, and people who have watched all kinds of scientific discoveries in health, for example, watching that science make its way into praxis, into the practice of everyday life, or be accessible to people, is a known gap that may never close for a lot of reasons. Some of the people who are the very best at closing the theory praxis gap are nurses, because they're the ones that are on the forefront and actually implementing the science. There's a whole fields of studies around this, and what they show, though, is when you are conscious of trying to take a holistic scientific theory like yours, this emergent holistic scientific theory, and bring it to people who are hungry for it. And the people who have been showing up to Kindred for all these years, including myself, have always said, I've said this so many times, and the number of people who would come to me and say, if I don't do what they're saying, what else is there? And I took time to unpack that question in the Parenting as a Hero's Journey program that we do, because it's a call. It's the Hero's Journey call to find out what else is there. So we know when those cultural creatives, as we call them, are coming through the door here and they're following this call, they have a sense there is something else. And we feel like you're affirming us, Dr. Narvaez. You're telling us something that we already feel in our bones is true, but we don't have the language for it. We don't have the scientific scaffolding that we need to transform our families, our own neurobiology, our communities, our fields of study, and our professional fields. And all of that now is being done in the Nesting Ambassador program. And I think just getting to this part of our story is took this long because I want people to understand the two directions that we're coming at this same issue from as a nonprofit activist and as a scientist. And then we have now the Nesting Ambassador program. We worked with so many people last summer in the beta testing group who came in and were so helpful and thoughtful, and they helped us to figure out, oh my gosh, we can't just have people study the lived experience. We have to do a learning experience and be trauma informed, because we haven't seen and experienced our nest in so long. It can be a deeply grief-stricken experience. Can you speak to that? The grief around discovering our evolved nest?
Yes, I think that's what we have a lot of in the unnested culture. A lot of grief because we didn't get what we needed from early on in babyhood and then throughout childhood, because it's such a coercive unresponsive culture, the dominant culture that puts money first and work over relationships and love, and generates then a biology of fear. And then that fear is then also covering up the grief that's there from the loss of relationship early on that you expected. And so, yeah, it's really hard for people to open up the gate, the cage where they've held all those feelings to try to just survive, building a big fat ego to as a cushion against feeling all those babyhood feelings, which make you feel like you're in the abyss. You're falling down. You're going to die forever. That's how a baby feels when they're left alone to cry, that deep despair. And so it's a difficult shift. But when people have been buffeted by circumstances and suddenly have an awakening in their awareness that this is not the way things have to be, like if they go to Africa and live in the village for a while or someplace, then they come back, it's like, why are people, like the Dalai Lama said when he first came to the United States, what's wrong with everybody? Because everyone's depressed. Everyone feels a lack of confidence, insecure deeply. And so there's a lot of grieving to do. And so we have revamped the nesting ambassador program order of components to start with healing practices in nature. Nature immersion, that's where we get our energy and our healing and our supports, even if we don't have it with humans. And then regular healing practices to get back as we go through all the rest of the material, tools that we can use to calm ourselves down, to feel readily connected to the cosmos, because we're always connected. We just forget that. Our perception is misguided. So that's what we've done.
So talk for a minute about Four Arrows' work. You and he started working together a long time ago. The work that you can find out there, the papers that you wrote together, inching towards this kinship worldview and nested kinship, as we're trying to call it, were quite some time ago. How does his work fit into the evolved nest science?
Well, he was one of the nudges. His work was one of the nudges that moved my neurobiology book into the indigenous perspective, because I heard him at a conference in 2010, right when I was writing the book. And it was like, of course, this is it, And then he and I organized a conference at Notre Dame. And in 2016, and we wrote a couple things together, because the evolved nest is how we get to the kinship worldview. And the kinship worldview, contrasting it with the dominant culture, is a way for adults to kind of realize, oh, I like that kinship worldview list, but I'm over here, what can I do? And so there's a top-down way of transforming ourselves, and then the bottom-up way, of course, is to raise the young so that they naturally develop the kinship worldview.
Yes, that is such a beautiful realization and a container for doing the work that we're doing, this worldview literacy. I had become a worldview literacy facilitator through the Institute of Noetic Sciences years ago, before I knew of your work and Four Arrows' work. And there was no mention of human development. I did have a discussion with one of the scientists there, whom I adore, and I adore all of them, in their garden one night. And I said, why are you guys not looking at babyhood and prenatal life and all of this? And they just said, oh, well, we haven't gotten around to looking at that. Like, isn't this where it could be formed, and what we want to consider instead of the wait until you're a grown adult and now you're going to spend your lifetime tending a neurobiology that was disrupted and traumatized in the dominant worldview that governs how we live now. So this piece has been very clarifying for me and helpful in teaching worldview literacy, to say, as you and Four Arrows have said, There's two. There are two worldviews. Our consciousness is our consciousness, and the worldview is our vehicle for our consciousness. And now we're going to understand the programming, and we're going to, that was, cultural programming, and then what's possible if we claim our relational intelligence and how that is done originally with our evolved nest being in place and available to us. Just tremendous, tremendous work.
So we want to decolonize our child raising and decolonize our minds as adults and rewild ourselves. Get back to being earthlings,
There we go.
respectful, responsible earthlings, connected always, never disconnected, never isolated. You shouldn't be doing that ever to a baby because that has an significant imprint on their sense of security, and then forever after their trajectory can go towards bracing against life because it gets triggered into that, feeling threatened. And then your blood flow shifts. You can't think very well because you're mobilizing, your body's mobilizing you for running away or fighting. So you have to make sure there's zero separation at birth, that birth is soothing. I mean, just a few hours separated from mother after birth has long-term effects on emotion and social capacities.
Yes. Wow. And now we're kind of at the place that the ocean is. We're just not going to look in that direction anymore. And if we do, we don't have the lens to look through. So I do feel like the evolvedness science at least helps us to have a lens to assess.
And the evolved nest science is transdisciplinary, so it's bringing together all sorts of sciences, the evolutionary systems, which is broader than genetics, neuroscience, clinical science, developmental science, education science, all these coming together with an understanding of what is species normal and how do we get there.
How do we get there? And, for a long time at Kindred, we've said we're sharing the new story. But what a new story this really is now, to be able to help ourselves shift our identity and to say this old story that you brought up in the beginning of our discussion of, oh, we're just, sinners, or, we're just, not very good people. And to say, no, that's not true. When we have our nest in place, we're very wise and we know how to be relational and live in harmony with life. And this is who we really are.
And
Which
that's
is,
the wellness pathway, right? You provide
yes,
for the young, meet the basic needs, actually meet basic needs of everybody throughout life, but especially important in early life so that they develop a very healthy neurobiology, sociality, morality that's inclusive and not exclusive. And then they develop thriving and the ability to get along with others and live a regenerative lifestyle so that they're living in cooperation with the rest of nature as well. That's the wellness informed
that's
pathway.
it. Yes, it is. And that just it gives us I love the trauma informed movement. It's been so helpful in the United States. But when you had started with recording lectures on what is wellness informed, because if we don't have what is the species normal components of, what helps us to be well and healthy, we're just looking at pathology again, which is what the worldview keeps us focused on, which is traumatizing and doesn't tell us who we really are. So thank you for those lectures, which we do have up on Kindred. And we do also have on the nestedworld.org website a wellness-informed and trauma-informed page that helps people to approach and share the evolvedness science in a trauma-informed way, but also in this wellness-informed way. So much to learn and so much so much good news coming in through the Nesting Ambassador program. And as the Nesting Ambassadors are again taking the science out there in the world on the Nested World site, we have a field reports section where they literally report from the field and tell us how's that going for you, and the diversity of ways that they are able to take the baselines for human thriving, which is what this is and implement it into nonprofits. I've seen people overhaul their whole nonprofit with that. They could also just overhaul the way they approach activism in their community. We have a beautiful video from Kathy Myers on updating her family network nonprofit, and Pam Leo does her approach to community activism. She was just celebrated this year as one of the leading activists and women activists in Maine, in the state of Maine. She received an award for that, and her approaches through the evolvedness lens. And then there's so many coming forward right now. It's a little overwhelming. The family systems therapy people just presented at a World Congress. The evolvedness science is being integrated in different fields of psychology. What else? What else, Darcia?
Nature Connection, John
Nature
Young and his group,
connection.
right? They've been
Yes.
integrating the nest there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a lot of good stuff, and we hope more people will join us to share the wisdom that we have received from on high, really.
Yes. Relational intelligence. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Darcia, for all of your work. Thank you for being here with us on this grand adventure. I look forward to this next year together with our nesting ambassadors.
Amen. Thank you, Lisa, for your partnership and for your
Thank you.
leadership.
Thank you.